The first video of the night was submitted by our friends at Konstellation Press, an indie publishing company for genre fiction that aims to give a voice to independent writers and create a supportive community for local authors. Listen carefully to this story. It is a beautiful, literary and art-filled homage to the author's longtime friend. Please enjoy The Brooch.
The Brooch. On January 7th, 2020, my friend, the artist Susanne Mühl, died. Susanne and I knew each other since we went to school together in our German hometown Stuttgart. I became an art historian and author, and Susanne a successful artist who exhibited in museums and galleries in Berlin, London, and New York. We both moved to New York and then to San Diego. Susanne has been a part of my life for so long. The hole she leaves is tremendous. For Day of the Dead, I made an altar for Susanne. It was covered with orange cloth and studded with examples of her art, including her bloody boxing gloves. She used to be a fighter with a brown belt in Jiu-Jitsu. She was also a guerrilla girl, one of the feminist art activists in 1980s New York who fought for more representation for female artists in museums and galleries. After her death, I found a pair of boxing gloves with a sticker, "I'm a guerrilla girl." During their lifetime, the guerrilla girls stayed strictly anonymous because their mission wasn't about them as individuals, it was about all women artists. Susanne was a fighter once, but in the end, she gave up hope. Her picture on the altar is framed by orange marigold flowers. In it, she wears a lei of orchids. She has a slightly lopsided, skeptical smile. Skeptical she could handle. Despair, not so much. Another picture on her altar shows her slim, sick body lying on a bed, and in another she sits in front of a bed with her wire sculptures behind her. Many of her artworks feature a bed where she spent so much time of her life. Other pieces include birds in cages with open doors, birds made of tin or enamel, birds too heavy to fly. On my desk sits a black lacquer box from her possessions. Inside are 6 maroon-colored 35mm bullets, the ones that were left over. A red velvet pouch in the box contains a legacy handed down to me by Susanne. It came from her mother, her grandmother, and her great-grandmother. I don't know how I fit into this line, except there was no other living relative left. I didn't want this inheritance. I tried to refuse and give it back. Instead of a small piece of jewelry, I wanted her, my friend, a little longer. I really don't care about possessions, even if they've been handed down for generations. Since it was so important to her, and since I ended up with this little brooch against my will, I feel I have to explore its significance. It's a small golden pin of a four-leaf clover, about 1 inch in diameter. I find it quite ugly, kitschy even. It has no meaning for me. I'm not Irish, not superstitious, and don't believe it brings luck. It didn't bring Susanne any luck, and it didn't do much for her mother either. I never saw Susanne wear the pin, but she left me an envelope with pictures of her, her mother, her grandmother, and her great-grandmother wearing it. There's also documentation with dates about when this brooch was transferred from one generation to the next. This type of legacy weighs heavily on me. What am I supposed to do about it? I do not believe in the erotic life of property. Possessions only have power over us if we give it to them. Mainly, they become burdens to weigh us down. I believe in the spirit of trees and animals, even rocks in nature. But a little piece of jewelry? On the back of one of the clover leaves is an engraving, Juin 1884. In June 1884, Margaret Adler, Susanne's great-grandmother, acquired this little pin as a souvenir during a trip to Paris. I'd like to know more about this visit. What did Margaret see? What did Paris look like in 1884? It was 5 years before the Eiffel Tower. Did she visit the Louvre? In 1884, the the winged victory of Samothrace was first exhibited in the Louvre Museum after its discovery in the Aegean Sea. What other artwork did she see? Rembrandt, Fragonard, Watteau? In 1884, Claude Monet had just moved to Giverny and painted haystacks in the Impressionist style. Seurat painted Afternoon at the Grand Jatte, portraying his fellow Parisians in their Sunday best, enjoying an outing into nature. Renoir painted sun-speckled gardens populated by fashionably dressed Parisian ladies. Middle-class Parisians enjoyed the café society and strolled the broad boulevards during their newfound leisure time. The Statue of Liberty loomed over the streets of Paris before its shipment to New York. Parisians and tourists alike moved around the city in horse-drawn carriages and in the very first open automobiles. Women wore long dresses and high-colored blouses like Margaret Adler in an early photograph from 1884, another souvenir from her journey wearing her brooch. Did Margaret meet someone in Paris? Did she have a fling? Did someone give her the brooch? A souvenir not just of a city, but a person? I'd like to think so, but she was already a married matron, strict and serious as her portrait attests. She stares straight ahead with that shell-shocked kind of look people have when they must sit still for minutes in front of the huge black box cameras of the time. Her austere black dress and tightly upswept hairdo don't hint at a carefree affair. For this severe woman, the four-leaf clover pin, barely visible on her high collar, seems almost frivolous. At least, it was suitably modest in size. Visiting Paris from Germany in 1884 was surely a great adventure, the journey of a lifetime, something to remember and tell your grandchildren about. We have proved this happened because Margaret Adler's granddaughter was Gertrude Müller, Susanne's mother, whom I knew well. A picture in my envelope also documents her wearing the brooch. Frau Müller, as I knew her, was like a grandmother to my children and like a substitute parent to me. Whenever we visited my ailing mother in Stuttgart, we stayed in the Müller's big and beautiful home. My children played in her garden and we had dinners and Kaffeeklatsch together on the terrace. Frau Müller was high-spirited, generous and energetic, and she could be very funny. One night, she told us all about the trophies she won as a sharpshooter, a talent she discovered at the local Oktoberfest. Frau Müller's pictures is on my refrigerator next to her daughter's. I never saw Frau Müller wear the brooch. She had no interest in fashion or jewelry. The four-leaf clover didn't bring her any luck. But she wasn't one to rely on luck. She was a fighter, like her daughter. How do I hold up my piece of this line of German women? I do not wear the clover pin, except for a special recording, but I wrote the story about it. I've traced and documented the pin's origin. It has taken me to Paris at the turn of the century and back to the southern German town of my youth. I tried to be a good friend to Susanne before and after her death. I was not able to persuade her that life is worth another chance. Neither were the generations of adventurous women before her. It wasn't enough to keep her from using the seventh bullet. By writing these stories and paying tribute to the brooch in Susanne's memory, I want to put what happened in 2020, including the brooch and the bullets, behind me. I put them back into the black lacquer box where the pin will rest together with the remaining 6 bullets. Susanne is gone, but her art survives.
So with that, it is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Cornelia Feye with Konstellation Press. Welcome.
Thank you for having me and for including Konstellation Press. It's great to be here.
Of course, thank you so much. So first of all, what a beautiful way to honor your friend. I mean, it was truly moving, and you know, the the piece does include a conversation about suicide, and you've been able to allow us to have this conversation to exist in a poetic and truly meaningful way. So I just want to say thank you for sharing this very private thing with us. It's beautifully done.
Thank you.
Yeah, tell me at what point, how did you decide that this was the way that you wanted to honor the life and death of your friend?
Actually, it started with this little brooch that she gave me, and that's the name of the piece, the brooch.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it was so important to her. She gave it to me, and she gave me the documentation, how it had been handed down through the generation of women to her, and then she wanted me to have it. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I kind of owed it to her and to this little piece of jewelry, that it was so important to her that I had to sort of do something with it. And that was sort of the initial impulse to write this story and then record it, because it's all very visual. It's a little object, and her life is all about visual arts. And then I had these images of these generations of women, and I wanted to, include them. And well, it was also the theme of your
right, the generation
segment, so that seemed like a happy coincidence.
Yes, it was so interesting too that it really was so special to her that it was documented, that it was passed on. I wonder what that first generation that passed it on, I guess it was Margaret, is it? That passed it on from the first to the next generation. I wonder what it was in her that decided, we need to document this. This is going to be, it really must have brought that woman good luck in some way, that she felt so strongly about it. So it's nice to dream a little bit and imagine.
Yeah. And especially since she got it in Paris, at this, even before the turn of the century. So it was a easy thing to fantasize about and try to go back to that time and to that place.
Yeah, I love that you did that. That you imagined everything that was happening in the late 1800s and what she would have walked through and all of that. I mean, I find it just fascinating, especially living in I lived in Paris at one point in my life, and in travel, as you've done, I'm sure, I love walking down streets that I know that have been walked down by, generations and generations of people. It makes you have some perspective about who you are and your legacy and what you're leaving behind and what will happen when you're gone and who else is going to walk down these streets. The cobblestone streets always do that for me, coming from Mexico City, where that's something that I used to see a lot. I want to share this quote for you by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, which comes from the Book of Joy. And as you know, we're theming everything around this, the 8 pillars inspired by the Book of Joy. And so Archbishop Desmond Tutu says, we are meant to live in joy. This does not mean that life will be easy or painless. It means that we can turn our faces to the wind and accept that this is the storm we must pass through. We cannot succeed by denying what exists. The acceptance of reality is the only place from which change can begin. And so as we're talking about acceptance, I want to wrap our conversation around your friend Susanne, the theme of acceptance, and what she, if as much as you're willing to share, but what she was willing to accept and wasn't willing to accept. And that's something that you addressed in your story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I knew that Susanne had plans to end her life. And I have to add that she also had been sick for a long time. And so it was, talking about acceptance, it was very hard for me to accept that. Mm-hmm. And I really always felt, well, I should try to change her mind or in some way. And I couldn't. So that was hard. And then when she actually did it, that was even harder to accept. There was this finality, and also that feeling that nothing was really enough to keep her from doing that I wasn't enough of a friend in a way to to keep her from ending her life.
The survivor's guilt is pretty common, right?
Yeah, so that was a little bit an impact or an impulse for me when I wrote this story, to kind of go through like these little stages of acceptance. And it was really important for me to remember her as an artist and her legacy, because those are all things that live on. Mm-hmm. And they go beyond her physical life, and her, her art will continue, and we're actually going to have an exhibition of her work.
Yes, tell us about that.
So the Athenaeum in La Jolla, where I also worked for 10 years, has agreed to let me organize and curate an exhibition of her work. And it will take place from January 15th to March 5th next year, 2022. So it was originally scheduled this past year, but of course it was canceled due to the pandemic. So I'm really happy that is going to happen again. Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to seeing that. I saw a little taste of her work at the very end of your video, and I wanted more. So I'm sure all of us felt that way.
Good.
And so, what else is there anything else that you can tell us about the 4 generations of women that were a part of the story? Do you know who they were married to, or occupations, or I guess not occupations, but in that generation, but were they involved in art as well, or what do you know about them?
Well, I don't know very much about those first 2 generations, but I knew Susanne's mother very well. And I mentioned that in the story when we would go back to Germany to visit my mother in southern Germany, in Stuttgart. That's where Susanne is from, and that's where her parents lived, and they would always host us. My whole family, the kids, they had a big, beautiful house, and we would all stay there while I visited with my mother, who was, in a nursing home with Parkinson's disease. And so, yeah, she was almost like a grandmother to my kid, and a really, really lively person. Not an artist at all. Her husband was a doctor, and she was a registered nurse who always had that dream to become a doctor herself. But it was difficult at the time, and especially after the war, for women to actually do the medical, to enter the medical profession. But yeah, and as I mentioned in the story, she was a sharpshooter.
Yeah.
One of her hobbies. So she was a great person, full of energy and full of life.
Yes. And then Susanne being a boxer. I mean, these women are fighters. If there's one thing that seems to be happening here as a trend at Beyond Generations, that these women are fighters. That's so lovely to discover. Because you got an opportunity to dig deep. Mm-hmm.
And especially, I mentioned it in the video that I found out she was a guerrilla girl, and I'm sure you're very well aware of the guerrilla girls.
Tell us about it for those that aren't aware.
Okay.
Please.
So it's an art group, a group of artists. It started in the 1980s in New York when I and my husband happened to live there, and they stayed anonymous, strictly anonymous, but they would do these actions and art events on behalf of women artists, and so they wore actual gorilla masks like the apes. And so they would go stage these interventions at museums, and they'd ask questions like, do you have to be nude in order to be accepted as a woman into the Metropolitan Museum?
Right.
They would come up with statistics of how few women were actually exhibited in galleries and museums. And they got press, and they got attention, and they really raised awareness about that fact of how women were there. And so Susanne, I was proud to find out, was one of them. And she even though I was her closest friend here, she kept that from me until after her death. So this is what they all agreed on. Yeah.
That's so cool. That is super cool. So I want to talk about Konstellation Press, about what it, publishing, the business of publishing. So for anyone that ever thought, oh, I'm going to write a book someday, what is the process? So take us through the process of, you've written your book. What comes next? How do you get published?
Yeah. So yeah, there's the 12 steps to publication, and I also teach classes about it at Writers Inc. But so in 2016, I founded Konstellation Press together with two other women that started out with us. And I had written a couple of books and self-published them. And it was tough. And
what does that mean, to self-publish? How you just had it printed where?
At Amazon, through Amazon.
Okay.
And so the first book was Spring of Tears, an art mystery set in France, which won the San Diego Book Awards. And then I wrote The House of the Fox, set in Anza Borrego Desert and San Diego. And I made a lot of mistakes, just kind of muddling through the process, because you have to understand about, first of all, how to market your book, how to present it, how to go through several layers and several stages of editing, of proofreading, of formatting, how to do a professional cover. And so all these things is sort of found out the hard way. And then I decided, well, you know what? We've got some experience here, and it would make sense to kind of found a indie publishing company, so we can help other authors maybe prevent some of the mistakes that we did, and also create a supportive network of authors. Because if you're out there alone, it's very difficult to kind of promote your work. And it's much, as you well know, it's much easier to promote other people and talk about them. And then it becomes more of a snowball effect, and you support each other, and you also give exposure to other artists and authors. And we wanted to give voices to talented authors, especially in San Diego. And created a lot of collaborations with bookstores, with independent bookstores like Warwick's, like La Playa Books, and Mysterious Galaxy, and now we're going to be at Barnes and Nobles, and we're at the airport in the bookstore. So and also events like this, where different disciplines come together. So we've had events in art galleries at Bread and Salt, and we've had events combining music and literature and readings. And
so are you actively scouting for new authors, or do they come reach out to you? What tell us about that.
Okay. So well, we're always open to submissions, and authors can actually submit their manuscripts without an agent, and we look at them, and there is a certain process. Like you mentioned, there's stages of developmental editing to make sure that the manuscript is really as strong as it can be, copy editing. But so we work with authors to get the books actually to the place where they are ready to go. So we focus and emphasize mainly genre fiction, mysteries, obviously, but also historical fiction. And yeah, we've had a few sci-fi or women's literature. And so it depends, but we will assess every submission, and we will look at it and give feedback to an author, even if we can't accept them into our portfolio.
Oh, wow. That's very generous of you. That's very generous of your time to do that. And so you mentioned there are 12 steps to getting published. You don't have to go through in detail all of the steps, but do you know the 12 steps off the top of your head, just to give us a sense of the journey?
Oh boy. This is like the 8 pillars. This is like the 8 pillars of joy.
Oh yeah, I couldn't.
You know them all.
I mean, not off the top of my head.
Yeah, you put me a little bit on the spot.
No, it's okay. It's okay. But we will...
I want to say this. If anybody is interested, please go to our website and the steps are there, or I will be happy to send them to them. So
yeah. And I do want to ask you about one other thing, which is that you accomplished something quite extraordinary during the pandemic. What was it?
Yeah, so the pandemic actually helped me to finish my latest book, The Death of a Zen Master. And it's a mystery that's set in a remote Zen monastery where a dead body is found.
Wow.
But it's a book. It's as much a murder mystery as it is a book about Zen philosophy, meditation, and also marital relationships. Because the main protagonist of the story, Greg Stern, was sent to this monastery as a reluctant guest by his wife after marital transgression. And so he struggles with this daily meditation and with the routine that he finds there until he finds the dead body.
I will not cheat again. I will not cheat again. Well, wonderful. Congratulations. What an accomplishment.
Thank you. Yeah, so it got good reviews, and I was happy to be able to sort of bring in, besides the murder story, some of the elements of a Zen monastery and some of these kind of mental, maybe spiritual evolutions and transformations that may take place by practicing meditation.
We'll be putting all of your information on how to reach you in the chat so everyone can access it right away. And I do have a question for you that related to our topic of the night. What is something that you do regularly that brings you joy and represents your true essence? Something that carries a lot of meaning and makes you feel like your truest self?
I like that question very much. And I was thinking about it, and I mean, actually a lot of things give me joy, from my first sip of coffee in the morning until watching the sunset go down in the evenings over the Pacific Ocean. And I'm so lucky to be here. We're lucky to be here. And I live in Point Loma, so I feel very fortunate to see that almost every night. But for this conversations, I would like to focus on the joy of reading and writing. And this is something that was brought home to me literally during the pandemic, that if you have a good book, you're never alone. And you are able to find the voices of the wisest and smartest people in the world. Like you were inspired by the Book of Joy, by Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu. So for me, in the last year, one of the books that really inspired me was The Smile of the Buddha by Jacqueline Bass. And it's about the Eastern philosophy and Western art from Monet to today. So she looks at art and finds the Buddhist or the Eastern elements in it. And so I also held a lecture series about this topic at UCSD and at the Athenaeum, where I chose artists and looked at them from that perspective. How has Eastern philosophy and Buddhist thought actually played a role in some of these artists' process of creation? Wow. So as a writer, I have to say that it gives me a lot of joy to write and to get into that flow of writing. And at that point, it feels as if everything I've ever experienced kind of flows into it and flows onto the page. And I'm just the vehicle and I'm just in that moment. Well, it doesn't happen all the time, obviously.
Yeah.
A lot of time it's difficult and it's a struggle. And all our writing needs to be revised over and over again. But I also enjoy, and there's joy in that word itself, I enjoy to work with other writers. And either in a reader and critique group where we give feedback to each other, or publishing work by mostly local writers, and then to just bring out that best in them. And nothing, frankly, tops the joy of holding your book after it's been published and hold it in your hand for the very first time.
Oh, wow. What a beautiful answer. Well done. I mean, you know, I think everybody has had that moment where like, I should write a book. Of course, I've thought about it. I've had an interesting life, I think, that a lot of people don't know about, but I've always thought about that. But this makes it feel a lot more accessible. So to anyone out there that is thinking about writing their book, there are resources for you. Please visit Konstellation Press and learn more about their 12-step process to becoming a writer. And thank you, Cornelia. You've been so wonderful. Thank you for spending time with us today. I really appreciate you. And thank you for submitting this beautiful film for our enjoyment.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you again. Okay, on with the show.
Thanks. Bye.